Connecting people and sharing experiences. This is the Retirement Years Podcast. Your hosts are Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing.
Hi there, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave. And first things first, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, Mary Ellen. And we hope, of course, that 2024 started it well for everyone. And we wish you and yours all the best for the new year.
Absolutely.
In today's episode, Mary Ellen and I spoke with two retirees from two very different parts of Ontario, Canada, who, once they retired, eventually picked up part-time jobs completely unrelated to their former professions.
Yeah, exactly. And I relate to this because that's kind of what I did. I picked up a part-time job as a server in a diner in the summer of 2022. And I mean, anyone who knows me said, what on earth are you thinking? And for me, coming out of the pandemic, I was really missing interacting with people because in my profession, right, I was in education. I interacted with people all the time. And I had never had the chance to be a waitress. And I know that may sound absolutely crazy to someone who has spent an entire career being a waitress or who was a server and didn't have a great experience or whatever. But I know a lot of people who are servers and absolutely love it. And one of the main reasons is because you meet the most interesting people. And anyway, I really love it. So I was interested to talk to other retirees who had picked up part-time jobs as well. I just wanted to see if maybe we had something in common and see what was different about why we've chosen to work in new fields.
Yeah, and I think it will be interesting because there's likely as many stories or reasons as there are people.
I think
and
so.
We have a couple characters for this episode who I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with. And our first guest that we're going to hear from is Juliet Sterney, who gave me very specific instructions not to call her Juliet. So I'll stop doing that now. And my apologies, Juliet, for doing that. Juliet explained to us what she did for a living before retirement.
So our guest today is Jules Sterney, and we're so excited to have you here with us today.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, as you know, this topic is near and dear to my heart because I can't seem to stay retired, according to my family. And I just want them to know really that I'm not the only one. So tell us, Jules, what you did for a living when you worked full-time before you retired.
Well, I worked for Yellow Pages for 20-something years as a manager, and that's publishing, advertising, quite high-powered, and I had various jobs within the industry. And then I was offered an early retirement at 49, which I almost didn't take, but I got in with 6 weeks to spare with years of service and age. And at that time, I was handling a database of all the white page listings across Canada. And I had a customer who was in data processing and was trying to headhunt me away. So when I retired, I didn't really retire. I just moved from Yellow Pages on Friday to DataFix on Monday. And that was my job from age 49 to 54. And in that job, I sold data processing solutions. So it was work for the government, Health Canada. We did the new red health cards. It was the snowbirds who went to Florida. We redirected their mail for Canada Post. We did marketing for the banks who couldn't get computer use on their own computers, too busy. So we did it all. So again, it turned into this high-powered job, which I didn't want. I wanted a much easier job. And so at 54, living in downtown Toronto, we decided my partner and I were going to up sticks. I quit my job. We sold the house and we moved to Castleton, Ontario. And that was the piece of fully retiring that helped us do that, was buying a cheap house and selling a more expensive house and having that little nest egg that we could live off.
So that's Jules. Now let's meet our second guest, Ed Smelt. let's start with having you tell our listeners what you did for a living when you worked full-time before retiring.
So I worked in a pulp mill for 22 years, and for the last 15 years, I was a manager there, a shift boss, called a tour foreman. But the mill went bankrupt. So before we closed, I applied at the school board because they were looking for a manager for East of Thunder Bay Transportation Consortium. So I was lucky enough that my last day at the mill was on the Friday, May 9th or something. I started that new job on May 11th. Yeah, so since the mill had gone bankrupt, we got 60% of our pension, and I was able to use that to buy all the years I had worked into the owner's pension. So it was terrific. It was unbelievable.
Amazing. And then, so how long did you work for the Transportation Consortium?
So I ended up with 10 years total, but 8 years I was the manager in Marathon. And then for the last 2, I went to Dryden because it was still an owner's employer. So I knew that I wasn't going to cause any problem with my pension. It was just an easy continuation.
Mary Ellen, Ed and Jules described very different careers.
Yeah.
Yet, I, as we were discussing, we noted there were a lot of similarities with their work background. Both were in a managerial type of a role. Therefore, their jobs could be high pressure, lots of stress. And they both did a very brave thing and chose to switch jobs 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through their working lives, which is, to me, it's a pretty courageous thing.
Yes.
And they managed to do it without missing a beat.
Yeah.
They left one full-time job on a Friday and started up somewhere new with a new job on a Monday. And that doesn't often work out that well for them, for anyone, but they had that planned.
They did.
Yeah. And we talked before about how wonderful it is if you have the opportunity as part of your job to contribute to a pension.
Yeah.
Ed was lucky that he was able to commute the credit he'd earned and the money he invested from his first pension into the pension at his new job. And some plans allow you to do that, but not all will allow you to migrate your experience and money into their pension. And that'd be a big factor when choosing, I'm going to take this leap from one career into another. And when we spoke in episode 1 this season about pensions, we talked about they're also wonderful tools to maintain your workforce.
Yeah.
Because you want to keep contributing, because it's really hard to walk away from a job where you've been contributing to a pension perhaps for decades.
Yeah.
If that means that you're going to either get a penalty or a smaller pension than you had intended. So in Ed's case, it worked out seamlessly, much like his transition from one job to the other.
Yeah. So then we asked each of our guests to describe what retirement was like for them initially, and also to explain how they wound up with part-time jobs.
And then how long was it from that point when you moved to reemployment?
Reemployment. Well, the first couple of years were just sort of giddy, that we didn't have any responsibilities and we were playing. We were doing all the things that we wanted to do that we could never do when we worked. I started doing some Reiki. I took up spinning and weaving. I started grooming dogs. I was just filling my time with things I like to do. And then somebody else actually got me my first paid job. She said, oh, there's a gallery. And this is kind of interesting because it was Brent Townsend's gallery. And he's the artist that designed the polar bear for the Toonie. And he had a gallery in Warkworth, and they needed somebody every other weekend. So my friend Karen Brown, who was called Downtown Brown because she worked in every store part-time, said, I've got a job for you. They need somebody up at Townsend's who can use a computer. And so I started working, and that's when I realized I kind of liked that little bit of extra money because it was outside of my budgeted money. And I got to meet people. It was just a really nice experience, and it was very low key.
Jules, I think it's interesting that you point out how the path you took to finding your first employment post-retirement, because one of the questions we would like to ask you, and you started to answer it, about how you felt upon retirement, because I don't know that I don't even know if there's been a study that would show that there's a clear correlation between I felt miserable when I retired, so therefore I worked, or I found myself short of money. I think there's probably as many reasons, and you described initial retirement as one of the best times you've had in a long time. So it wasn't that, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but you didn't retire and say, oh, I'm miserable right out of the gate. But was it a bit of restlessness that brought you back to, like, you can only vacation so long or play so long? Like, just wondering the thought process when you said, you know what, I will. Because once you took it, you enjoyed it. But what motivated you to go forward and say, I'm going to take a paid position for a little bit?
Well, I played for a couple of years and I was having a good time. I was enjoying time. And I think this is important for people. I was enjoying time with my partner, who was 8 years older than me. And, you've only got limited years together. And so those first couple of years, we were exploring this new area that we lived in, and new friends, and friends were coming out from the city and staying with us. So we had a very full life the first couple of years that we were out in Castleton and we were retired. And then that started to fall off. The friends from Toronto, we didn't have much in common with them anymore. We were gradually, this pulling away started to happen. And we did have more time on our hands and thought, you know what? Maybe we should be doing something, because I think if you're those kind of people that you're active, you always had active work lives and a social life, you can't just plonk yourself in front of the TV and think you're going to be happy for the next 20 years. Yeah. And people are a big part of my life. And the thought of being in a store, I'd never done that before, doing some retail, I just thought that would be really fun. And my partner did something completely different. She loved to cook, but we had to have, if we were going to do a little business of our own, we had to have something where we wouldn't lose our money if it went pear-shaped.
Yeah.
So baking pies for the market and selling sausage on a bun in Brighton, she got her people fix and loved it. I hated that, the packing the car, the unpacking, that just wasn't for me at all. But she thought it was great. So she was right into that. So she did her thing. And then I guess that's another reason why it sort of opened up my weekends for me. I was going to be on my own otherwise. And so this little job came along and it worked out. Almost became a plan.
So, Jules, what are you doing now in quote unquote retirement?
What am I doing now? Well, many years on, I met a lovely couple, a therapist and her partner, who is a costume designer in the movie industry. And they moved from Calgary to Toronto and then kept their Toronto home and bought a farm in Warkworth, and we became very close friends. Little town of Warkworth has a lovely little restaurant, Janine's Back Talk Cafe. Everybody goes there. Everybody knows it. The store beside it kept coming up for rent, and the rent was really cheap. And Trish and Joe decided, wow, why don't we do something with that store? And I was in on all these conversations. Yeah, why don't we do something? Well, Trish said, my granddad had a tobacconist when I was a kid in Newcastle in England, and he sold sweets and tobacco, but he just liked talking to people. He didn't care whether he sold anything. That's the store I want. So the General on Main became something, and I helped set it up. Joe was away filming. She wasn't there, so it was Trish and I just offered at first. I said, well, I'll help you. I don't want a job, but I'll help you because it sounds like fun. And then it dawned on me that saying I'll help you wasn't any help, because they needed somebody reliable to work on Thursday or something like that. So that's how I ended up being what we call one of the Gen girls. And the Gen gals, that's a very loose term for everybody over 60. And now we're up in Hastings. The business has grown. The building they were in sold during COVID. They went up to Hastings, thought, well, this might be a good little town, and bought a hairdressing salon that was up for sale, renovated the whole thing. We all moved in. Then the stock, there was nowhere to put it, so they developed it's like a portable on their property where all the stock goes. So we now have another old Gen gal that manages and works in the background, organizing all the deliveries. So this is another case of people who thought they were retiring from their big day jobs have got themselves well and truly into another business. And their idea of a business has a lot of money behind it, whereas my idea of a little business basically didn't have anything behind it. But it's just as viable. It depends how much money you want to make and how much commitment you want.
So, Ed, we've talked a lot on our podcast about the transition from working to retirement, and it sounds like you kept yourself quite busy, and then retirement comes along. So how, if you could put it into words, how did it feel when you first retired? So you've put in your notice and now you are done with work, that full-time work. How did that feel?
So it felt really odd because I had one of those retirement calculator, the calendar that goes backwards. So right. I had it counting down to the minute that I retired. I also knew that I was going to retire on my birthday because for OMERS, you have to be 55 and have 30 years service, or you could have the 85 factor, but you still had to have the 55 age. So I actually had to work 2 years longer than I wanted to, but I still knew that I had to do that. So the part that was really hard was it was also during COVID. So when it was my last day, we didn't go out for lunch. We couldn't have anything. I mean, I had some balloons at my desk, but I knew that I had to just pack up and go home. So it was like I left for a weekend and never went back. So, and then at another point, they asked me if I would do an additional 18 months contract, but I didn't want to go travel back and forth.
Because when you finished that full-time job, you were in Dryden, right? Yes. And so then when you retired, you guys moved permanently to Thunder Bay, right?
Right. But we'd already bought a house in Thunder Bay and I was living the weeks mostly in Dryden and some weekends and then coming home for a 4.5-hour drive on some of the weekends.
Yeah. So continuing that for another 18 months wasn't overly attractive.
And Mary Ellen, I think it's important to point out anyone listening that is either not from Ontario or Canada or almost anywhere else. Ed is describing some beautiful parts of our country, not the warmest parts of our country. They're pretty far north, and when you're talking for us Southerners down here in Southern Ontario, Dryden and Thunder Bay.
It's true.
So yeah, eliminating the drive would have been that would be a pretty it would reduce a lot of your stress. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So then, at what point did you decide that you would consider working again?
So I didn't know if I was going to or not, but I just, when I got back to Thunder Bay, I started out doing some volunteering at the Greek Orthodox Church with their souvlaki dinners. And I was getting more and more calls to do more and more for them. And then I just thought, why don't I just get a job if I'm going to be doing this all the time? And then someone told me I saw them and they said, well, LCBO hires for fixed terms. And I thought, well, that would be perfect because I can work the 2 months around Christmas and I can do the one around March. And if I want, I could do summer. So I just thought that would be perfect.
You applied to them?
Yeah, I did it online and I did an online interview. And then I got hired right on the spot and told I started on the next Wednesday.
I know when we were listening to Jules describe the first phase of her retirement, we both looked at each other and thought, yes, that's the honeymoon phase you're describing, where she enjoyed time with her partner. She learned Reiki, spinning, weaving, dog grooming, not all at the same time.
No.
But all things she loved to do. But when we're working full time, those things tend to get put on the back burner.
Yeah.
And Jules eventually found herself with more time on her hands when her partner was selling baked goods that they created at a market on weekends. And also friendships based on their former lives and locations started to recede. And that's a natural process, really, because you've moved on and you stay in touch for a while. And they were finding that some of those friendships were not ending, as we've said, receding a bit.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point that Jules raises about relationships with friends changing when you retire. And I mean, that sounds like something I think we should explore in a future episode, don't you?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this episode and you have a story to share about how a relationship changed once you retired, send us an email at theretirementyearspodcast@gmail.com. or send us a direct message on either Instagram or Facebook. We really do love hearing from listeners, and sometimes your questions and suggestions spark a topic for an episode.
Yeah, they do. Often they do. So back to our friend Jules. So she finds herself with extra time on her hands on weekends, and a friend suggests that her skills, being, I don't know if everyone noticed, relatively outgoing, that those skills could be put to work at a local gallery where she'd be a wonderful host. And she did that for a while. And then she offered to help two friends who were starting up a general store in their small community. And that turned into a part-time retail job as well.
Well, I thought it was interesting that Jules said the attraction was initially helping out, like first at the gallery and then helping out her friends. Really, though, it was the fact that she'd never had a retail job, which I relate to because I never had a serving job.
Right.
And it sounded like fun, right? That's what attracted her to working part-time in retail. And you're right. You could tell that she's clearly a people person. And she felt the retail job would give her what she called her people fix, right? Just as her partner enjoyed interacting with the public and got her people fix at the local market on weekends.
Yeah. And then when we look back at Ed, when he first retired, he found himself quite busy with his volunteer commitments. And then that got to be a pretty big chunk of his time. And then his thought process turned to, well, maybe I should consider getting a job. And that's when his connections through what he was already doing, volunteering, someone had led him to, well, the LCBO is hiring, and Ed successfully applied.
Yeah. And I appreciated the fact that in their interview, you did explain for listeners a little bit about the geography that we're talking about. I don't think people who live inside Ontario, but definitely people who live outside of Ontario and outside of Canada really have no sense of just how vast the physical geography of one province in Canada is. And Ontario is, I believe, the widest province in our country. And it takes more than 2 days to get across the province from one end to the other. So thanks for that geography lesson.
And just to further that, that's on the few months that it's good driving.
Fair.
And also, when we mentioned the LCBO, 4 letters that go together that most people in Ontario identify right away, but it stands for the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. And to the public face, they're government-run outlets that regulate and sell liquor, beer, wine, and other spirits in the province of Ontario. Then they are literally in almost every place.
Oh, yeah.
In our province, like from the smallest hamlets to the big towns, obviously. And also, we're not that far behind the world. You can also buy some wine, beer, and some coolers in grocery stores now as well.
That's relatively new for Canada. Well, for Ontario, I should say. So for Ed and Jules, we also asked both of them what they loved about working part-time in retirement. And I think for Jules, it was mostly the interacting with people. Obviously, it was helping her friends out. It was getting to take her dog Remy to work with her. I mean, how cool is that? Not too many jobs where you get to take your furry friend with you. And having a bit of money to play with that was outside of her regular retirement budget. Ed's answer, though, as you're about to hear, was a little bit different. So, Ed, what do you like best about your current job?
So I really like that I could say no to the shifts. And I just love, I take it almost as exercise. I end up in the back a lot unloading the transport trucks. So I do a lot of physical, and I always wear my watch. So I always know at the end of my shift that I had 8 kilometers or, and I know I lifted boxes and stuff all day long. So a lot of it is both the exercise, and then you get a small paycheck to go with it.
Instead of paying to go to the gym, you get paid to work out. That's brilliant.
Well, and then sometimes I bring work home with me. So my wife doesn't really like that part.
I get that.
And even more than I make in a whole shift, I sometimes bring that home. So,
well, you have to be able to give advice to customers. So you need to be able to sample the products.
Right.
And the other thing too, though, is when I did I did 8 years in marathon for Superior Greenstone Board. I was the only employee for the East of Thunder Bay Transportation Consortium. So I did all my stuff alone. If I took time off, no one did my work. I came back and had to do it. Now that I'm working in the public, I'm seeing hundreds and hundreds of people every day. And plus I work with, 15 to 20 people each shift. So it's just a lot more fun and interaction. And it's almost stuff I missed from working in my last job.
That makes sense.
And I see happy people. When you're transportation for school boards, you only get angry mothers and fathers.
It was interesting to note what Ed saw as the benefits, some of the benefits of his job. And I mean, he pointed out that some of the money that he made, he put that to good use, often with family. And as you and I have discussed, they're always your kids, and apparently always cost money. But his main motivation wasn't that bit of money. And I think he would admit that what a great position to be in.
Yeah.
But he enjoyed the physical aspect. He kind of saw it as getting the gym for free, or I know you pointed that out as well when we were talking to him, and being able to bring his work home now and then. I think Ed may have been alluding to the product, and trust us, listeners, Ed doesn't mean that he takes it.
No.
It just means he's already there, and perhaps if he wishes to have something, he would purchase it on his way home. But both Ed and Jules, the most positive part of their new job for them was found in that social aspect of working with other people and interacting with the public in a positive way. Because some of us have done jobs where that's not always the case, because not many people go out of their way to tell you positive things. And they enjoyed that part. It was fun.
Exactly. And for me, working at the diner, that's, one of the best parts of my job is interacting with people who usually generally are pretty happy when they're coming in to be fed. And I have been very pleasantly surprised at the physical benefits of racing around a diner for 5-hour shifts, 6-hour shifts, 7-hour shifts. It's been really good for me physically as well as socially and mentally. So and of course we talked in season 2, I think it was episode 8 or 9, we talked with Joanne from the health unit about why that's important, right? The importance of connection with others and not being sedentary, right? Staying active as we age, right? As part of our health. So finally, we asked both Jules and Ed to share any advice that they might have for anyone who's not yet retired or who may be retired and a little bit restless.
Jules, initially, this journey all started with you taking early retirement.
Yes.
And in my former life, often, and that was working with and helping to counsel educators, we would discuss, especially someone maybe nearing the end of their career, what their options were. And sometimes it never occurred to them part-time work. You could still reduce your time and have some time to yourself. So it worked out well for you. And if someone was listening and they're getting, well into their career, but that step into retirement is fearful for them, would you have some advice for them around, okay, once you retire, then you could still do these things? I think you would agree with that. You don't have to see it as I'm going to stop working forever, or I can choose whatever I want to do. But the early retirement, or retiring when you're kind of ready, but you're not sure that, that does that make me obsolete? I think you would probably share that that's not the case. You could leave right from that. You could have a plan ahead to go into some sort of employment upon retirement from your, as you called it, day job.
Absolutely. There are so many opportunities, and I think it's up to the individual. A lot of people have hobbies that they've never really pursued that can also bring them in an income these days. If you're a knitter or something like that. So, and like the cooking, you can do a small market thing. But working for other people, there's a huge market, a need for part-time employment. I don't know about Toronto, but it's certainly in small towns in Northumberland County. They're always looking for people. And a lot of it is retail. Retail are always looking for people. But the other piece of that too is very often if you volunteer, and when I first retired, I did look up online, I Googled volunteering, and there's everything from volunteering in a church right through to doing theatre work. Northumberland Players are always looking for volunteers. And it seems as though once you start getting yourself involved in little groups, committees, people will tell you about a job they've heard of that's come up. It's much easier than you think to find work, and there's a variety of it wherever you think you would fit. If you're a social person and you want to meet people, it's fabulous doing retail. But if you're quieter and you want some, there's very often there's some office work that's out there that's available if you feel you want to do that. But I would suggest to anybody, get out there and know your community, because stuff tends to come to you once you get to know the community and you start talking to people. It's just amazing how basically the universe brings all this stuff to you if you're open to it. I'd be brave. I mean, I think people have been led down. I don't know. It's a safe road when they tell you how much money you have to retire. It's way more than you really need. I figured out when I left work how much money I saved, because I wasn't paying for parking, I wasn't paying for dry cleaning, I wasn't buying my lunch, and I wasn't buying my breakfast every single day. I can get by with a t-shirt and iron it for a formal and a pair of jeans where I live. So you don't spend as much, you don't need as much. So I wouldn't be scared, and there are jobs out there.
That is awesome advice, Jules. Absolutely awesome. Listen, is there anything you wanted to tell us on this topic that maybe we didn't ask you about?
Just to say that I think most people, when they're nearing retirement age, are probably at the top of their profession. And when you're at the top of your profession, they're paying you a very good income. But boy, do they want a lot from you when you're doing that. And I think that's another thing. You're so used to being so busy and your kids are probably in university or they're getting married. I mean, it's everything comes at you. And then the thought of letting it all go, it's like, God, I need all this money and we can't let it go. Look what's happening. That really isn't how it is. When you finally make that move, I felt like somebody had taken a suit of armor off me. I was almost giddy. I felt mentally light, and I didn't realize how much it had been weighing on me. And I give this advice to my friends who are still working. And I say, don't leave it too late to retire, to enjoy your partner, and just have a life with them. You know, you go on a budget, it doesn't matter. You don't need as much when you're older. You're not traveling as much. If you want that kind of retirement, that really high-end retirement, that's a whole different thing. I didn't want that. I just wanted to live in the country, live with my partner, have some good friends, and just have a good time. I mean, my needs are very small. So I think you have to bear that in mind too. But yes, I felt it was the best thing I ever did was to retire at 54.
People listening on either side of the equation right now, that they're either about to retire or thinking about it, or they are retired, and there may be something holding them back from considering employment after. And I think you've already made some great points about why it is, if not lucrative, liberating. But is there anything else you'd add about, okay, so why would I consider working after retirement? What are some other benefits of that, and why should I not be fearful of taking that step?
So a big thing that I had was when I got home from work or from my full-time job, I felt like I was unemployed. Like all my whole career, I never once had an unemployment check. Right. And now here I am at home thinking that I have nothing to do. Like, what am I supposed to do? So I kind of knew pretty early that I was probably going to have to find a job for part-time, and not for money.
Yeah. Just to stay productive or feel productive.
Yeah. And to feel like I can still work. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't want to be the old guy that's not pulling my weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there any other advice that you would give to somebody if they're considering working part-time?
So you might want to consider, if you had a whole retirement plan, what this extra money does to your plan. Like for me, so I did my first income tax after I worked my first year. And had I not worked, I would have got $300 back. And because I did work, I ended up paying $5,000. And that's on top of making like pretty much minimum wage there, which is still $16, but or a little bit higher, but still. So you're actually working for a very low amount of money, but it wasn't about the money. And I still want to do it. And I still say yes to every ship they call me. So I don't even really understand why.
I think something that Jules said that's important is There are many opportunities in most places for part-time employment for older adults. And don't sell yourself short, because whatever job you did, or even if you never had a job, you have got life experience and skills that an employer in some way could utilize that, and you would be valuable to them. Episode 2 this season, David and Susan Schwartz, the authors of our Costco book, we're talking about how Costco's workforce includes a great deal of older adults, some of them working, most of them, I should say, working part-time. So there's opportunities there. And you may hear about employment opportunities when you're volunteering somewhere in the community. So if you're doing that, keep your ears open if you'd like to also get a little bit of money for what you're doing. It's important to get out there and get into your community events and your local community center. And Mary Ellen, you'll remember season 2, episode 5, we talked with Stephanie and Sherry about all of the great programs you can find in your local rec center, and you will meet a ton of new people there. And that could lead to maybe either further volunteering, doing things you love, or some sort of part-time job to help you out a little bit if you could use the extra money.
A little bit of mad money.
Yep.
And I mean, both of them talked about money, Jules and Ed. Jules said you won't need as much as you might think in retirement, which I would agree with. And Ed also cautioned that you want to consider what the extra income does or will do to your financial retirement plan. And I mean, everybody understands the importance of taxes, but nobody wants to pay more than they have to.
Yeah, because one of the things Ed mentioned was he was very careful to max out his registered retirement savings.
Yeah.
And I know that just defers the taxes, but now is when that deferral is due.
Yeah.
And so when you are considering working, that income is going to also play into if you were planning on paying yourself out of those retirement savings, if you were in a position fortunate enough to put some money aside. Joe Curry, who was a wonderful guest this season, a financial planner that we spoke to in episodes 3 and 4, had some excellent advice around managing your assets. And I know some people listening are saying, well, I barely have any. You still want to maximize whatever assets you have, and financial planners are there to help you with that. And if you missed Joe's advice, you can always catch up on his episodes or all previous episodes and seasons on our website or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Absolutely. And listen, I want to take this opportunity to thank listeners on those various podcast platforms, including Spotify. Thank you for following us so that you get notified as soon as our podcasts are available early Friday mornings. I am so stoked that we have listeners on Spotify, at least in 49 countries around the world. And it was very exciting to see at the end of 2023 that so many of you, hundreds of you, chose our podcast in your top 5 favorite podcasts for 2023. So thank you from the bottoms of our heart.
And just in time for the new year, we are so excited to announce that we have merch. Yes, the Retirement Years podcast, your favorite podcast, has merch. We have tumblers, we have t-shirts, we have golf shirts, we have tea towels, we have so many things. Please head on over to our website, theretirementyearspodcast.com, and check out what's available.
And Mary Ellen, I think you're sitting on some other information. Don't we have a contest winner?
Congratulations to Catherine of Renfrew, Ontario, Canada. Catherine is the winner of our Season 3, Episode 2 contest. Catherine has received a copy of The Joy of Costco by David and Susan Schwartz, and you'll remember that we interviewed them in Episode 2 of Season 3. Congratulations, Catherine. Thank you so much for being a loyal listener and for participating in our contest.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. On our next episode, we are going to talk to 2 guests who not only returned to work after retirement, but to almost the same job. And why would anyone want to do that? Fair question. Tune in next week and you'll find out.
Yeah.
So until then, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mary Ellen. Stay well.
You've been listening to the Retirement Years Podcast. Original music by Theodora Draper. Web design by Gavin Hinton. Social media marketing and management provided by Madison Sloan. Find her at MSS Mad Media.